The wind kicked up dust along the quiet main street of Dry Willow, a nothing town nestled between two long-forgotten hills. The kind of place where mail came late, whiskey came early, and no one ever stayed long enough to ask questions. A place that kept its head down when trouble passed by. But trouble didn't always knock. Sometimes it wore a dress and walked in on blistered feet. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. Barefoot, sunburnt, tangled hair like straw caught in a thicket. She stood at the edge of the boarding platform, holding a biscuit in one hand and a ragged cloth doll in the other. Her eyes scanned each face that stepped off the eastbound stage, wild with hope. When they all passed her by, she stared down at her feet, lips pressed tight. Then another woman stepped down. She wore a long grey coat, frayed at the cuffs, boots caked in red earth from places this town had never heard of. Her face wasn't soft or gentle, but it wasn't cruel either. It was quiet, like someone who used to laugh but forgot how. Her name was Clara Tate, but no one here knew that yet. She paused on the bottom step of the stage, adjusting the leather strap of the satchel across her shoulder, and looked around like she wasn't sure why she'd stopped in Dry Willow at all. Then came a tug at her coat. The girl looked up at her with solemn, searching eyes. "You look like my new mama," she said, voice raspy, as if it hadn't been used in days. Clara blinked. Her fingers twitched at her side, almost reaching for the girl, but stopped. The kind of reach a body makes before it remembers it's not supposed to touch. Before she could speak, a sharp voice cut through the dust. "Delilah, I told you not to bother folks." A woman came stomping down the porch of the general store, all bustle and sweat-stained apron, wiping her hands on the front. "Mrs. Haverly, keeper of the store, and of opinions no one asked for, she ain't yours, ma'am," Mrs. Haverly said to Clara, squinting against the sun. "Her real mama died 3 weeks back. Fever, ain't no kin to take her. She just sort of, stayed." The girl Delilah didn't flinch. She looked back up at Clara, waiting, like she knew something Clara didn't. But let's go back to where it all started. 2 days earlier, Clara had been riding along the northern pass, just trying to outrun silence. Her husband had died last winter under a collapsed roof. Mining town, near Galena. She buried him with her own hands, said no words over the grave, and kept walking west. She hadn't spoken to a soul in weeks. Didn't see the point, until her horse pulled up lame just outside Dry Willow, just her luck. A cracked hoof and a dried-up creek bed. No choice but to limp into town and hope for a blacksmith who didn't ask too many questions. She'd planned to buy some water, maybe a saddlebag of supplies, and be gone by morning. But then the girl looked up at her like that later that afternoon. Clara sat on the wooden bench outside the saloon, sipping weak coffee and chewing on a biscuit too dry to swallow without it. Delilah sat beside her, legs swinging. She hadn't asked permission. Just sat, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You got a name?" the girl asked, mouthful of nothing but air. Clara stared out across the road. Clara's a nice name. My mama's name was Joy, but she weren't very joyful, mostly, except when she sang." Clara nodded, barely. "You got anyone?" The girl shrugged, still swinging her legs. "Mrs. Haverly lets me sleep in the back storeroom sometimes. Says I'm a charity complication. Don't know what that means, but it don't sound good." Silence stretched between them. Then Delilah leaned her head against Clara's arm, light, barely there, like a question wrapped in warmth. "I think you were supposed to find me," she whispered. Clara stiffened. Not because of the weight of her, but because of how easy it was to let it be there. She stood up. "I'm not staying." The girl looked up, eyes round. "Why not?" "Because I don't belong here." Delilah's mouth opened like she was going to argue, then closed. She just nodded, eyes following Clara as she stepped off the porch and walked toward the blacksmith's. But Clara didn't make it to the forge. A man leaned against the corner post of the livery, arms crossed, watching her with the slow, calculating look of someone who'd been waiting. Tall, row-boned, face like sun-baked leather. Sheriff Malden, or as close to law as this place had. He tipped his hat slow. "Can I help you with something?" Clara asked, keeping her voice even. Funny thing, he said, not moving. Girl. Hasn't spoken to anyone in town in near 2 weeks. Then you show up, and she's calling you her mama. I didn't ask for that. No ma'am. But kids don't always wait for an invitation. You planning to take her? Clara narrowed her eyes. Take her where? Don't much matter, does it? Folks here ain't lining up to raise orphans, but you ain't one of us. Don't know what you've done or left behind, but I know the kind that keeps walking. You look like you're running from something. Clara glanced back toward the porch, where Delilah still sat, hugging her knees. I'm not the saving kind, she said quietly. Maybe not, but she seems to think you are. The sheriff pushed off the post and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the street, the dry wind curling her coat at the hem. The sun hung low now, slanting hard light across the dirt road. Evening settled in like dusts, low and certain, and Clara realized something heavy and dangerous had taken root that afternoon. A girl had looked up at her and believed she was worth trusting. She wasn't ready for that, but sometimes the road you take stops walking and asks you to stay. The next morning came with the same colorless sky and dry air, as if the land had decided not to wake up properly. Clara stood near the blacksmith's, tying her satchel shut. Her horse was shoed, watered, and ready to limp. As far as the next town, maybe farther. She had no destination, just a direction. That had been enough, until now. Delilah appeared again, without sound, the way children who've been ignored too long learn to move. She had a dented tin mug in her hands, filled with cold beans. Mrs. Haverly said, I could bring you breakfast, she said. Sort of. Clara took the tin slowly. You eat yet? The girl shrugged, then nodded, then shook her head. A mix of both, like most kids who live on scraps. Clara handed the tin back. Split it with me. Delilah smiled small, and they sat on the edge of the trough in silence, passing the spoon back and forth. Across the street, curtains twitched in windows. 2 men leaned against the post office porch rail, spitting tobacco and whispering. Mrs. Haverly stepped outside, just to sweep, but did it with hard, loud strokes that had nothing to do with dust. By midday, it was clear. People were noticing, and people in Dry Willow didn't like what they didn't understand. Sheriff Malden showed up again, this time at the livery, where Clara was packing her gear. He didn't bother with small talk. She's not your daughter, he said. Town doesn't want complications. You leave with her, and it starts whispers. You stay with her, and it starts trouble. Clara didn't answer right away. She cinched the saddle, tugged once, then turned to face him. She needs someone. And what about what you need? The sheriff asked, tilting his head. You think you can just take her, and the road'll forget you? Clara's jaw worked, but no sound came. He stepped closer, quieter. You ever bury a child? Her eyes flicked up. You don't want to ask me that. Malden looked away, jaw clenched. Town council's meeting tonight. They'll want to know what you intend. I don't owe this town anything. No, he said. But that child's already paid more than she should. He left her with that. No threats, just truth. Later that evening, Clara sat on the back porch of the boarding house, watching the sun leak into the horizon. Delilah curled beside her, head against Clara's ribs. She was asleep, or pretending to be. Clara hadn't moved for near an hour. A voice stirred from the shadows, soft, cracked. She liked to sit just like that. Clara looked up. An older man stood, leaning against a post. Broad shoulders, gone to stoop, weathered skin, eyes too sad to be suspicious. His name was Ezra Cole. Town carpenter, sometime preacher. Joy's father, someone had told Clara, she'd sit by the stove when the baby was too fussy. Just hum, not words, just sound. He smiled faintly. I'd give anything to hear it again. He stepped closer, looking down at Delilah. She don't speak to many, but she watched you like she was waiting. I'm not anything special. Ezra nodded slowly. Maybe not, but sometimes a child doesn't need someone special. Just someone still standing. Clara looked out over the street again, empty now, except for a stray dog nosing through a barrel. Her voice was low, nearly lost in the wind. I've lost too many. Ezra sat down slowly beside her, not touching, just near. Me too. A long quiet stretched between them. Crickets started their song beneath the porch. Lamps lit behind windows. Distant piano chords drifted from the saloon. She had a fever, Ezra said at last. Went fast. I was working on a rocking chair out back. By the time I knew something was wrong, she was already slipping. His throat tightened. Just stopped talking. Like the words left with her mama, Clara's eyes stayed on the girl beside her. I don't know what to do with a child. Ezra gave a small, sad smile. Nobody does. Not really, you just stay. That's most of it. That night, word spread through the town like heat through a stovepipe. She's taking the girl. She's not even married. Don't know where she's from, but I bet it ain't good. I bet it ain't good. By morning, a letter had been posted on the church door unsigned, but clear. Strangers should pass through, not stay, especially with children, not theirs. Sheriff Malden found Clara feeding her horse behind the stable. She didn't turn when he stepped up. You saw the letter? He asked. I saw it. He sighed, rubbing a hand through his hair. I can't protect you if this gets worse. I didn't ask you to, but the girl, ... Clara turned then, eyes flint and storm. She's not a threat, she's not a burden, she's a child. Nodded slowly. I agree, but not everyone does, and not all dangers come from outlaws. Clara looked past him, toward the general store, where Mrs. Haverly was talking with two other women, heads bent, glances sharp. Fear made people foolish. She'd seen it before. You think they'll come for us? She asked. Not with guns. He said. With gossip, with pressure. They'll try to force you out without touching you. She breathed in, slow. The scent of dust, sweat, something burning in a far-off stove. What happens if I stay? Meldon met her gaze. Then you better decide who's worth fighting for. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat by the window of the small room the widow Maureen had let her borrow, watching the street for shadows that didn't belong. Delilah slept cold on the cot, her doll clutched tight, and for the first time, in weeks, Clara didn't think about leaving. She thought about staying, which, for her, was the scarier choice. The next morning brought no peace, only stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't belong, like the earth itself was waiting for something to snap. Clara stepped out onto the porch with Delilah still asleep upstairs, clutching her doll. The town felt wrong. Folks moved slower. Doors that used to stay open were now shut. Eyes tracked her, not with curiosity, but calculation. Like they were counting something. She made her way toward Ezra Cole's workshop, needing to feel another heartbeat that hadn't turned cold. The old man was sanding down a cradle, one he'd started for a baby that never arrived. He didn't look up as she entered. You feel it? He asked. Clara nodded. What are they waiting for? Ezra set down the sandpaper and sat on the edge of the work table, wiping his hands. They're waiting for you to leave. Or for someone to make you. Door slammed outside. Too loud, too close. Ezra's eyes flicked toward it, then back. Sheriff told me a group of men rode in late last night. Townsfolk said they were just passing through. They never are. Clara said. No, Ezra agreed. They've got that look. Wide hats, matching coats, rifles that aren't for hunting. Hired men, most likely. Sent for. Ezra didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clara walked back to the boarding house before noon, and she saw them. 3 men sitting outside the saloon, broad-backed tan dusters, boots up on the rail like they already owned the place. They didn't talk, just watched. Sheriff Meldon met her at the corner. They're not here for drink or trade, he said low. Name's Cyrus March, ex-cavalry. Now runs cleanup for towns that don't like the look of certain folks. They've got a way of handling complications. Clara clenched her jaw. The girls, not a complication. They don't see it that way. They see a stranger dragging baggage they don't want. She stared at him. Are you going to stop them? Meldon's face twisted with something like guilt. I don't control them. I can't arrest a man for sitting quiet and legal, but if they act, I'll stand in the way. That'll be too late. Meldon didn't argue. As the sun dropped lower, the air grew tighter. Even the dogs stopped barking. That kind of hush only comes before something bad. Inside the boarding house, Clara packed what little she had, hands moving fast. She didn't know where she'd go, just knew they had to be gone before nightfall. But when she reached the stairs to fetch Delilah, the girl was already standing there. She held her doll close and looked up with wide eyes. Are we leaving? Clara knelt down. I think we need to. Why? Because not everyone wants us here. Delilah bit her lip. But I want you here. Clara closed her eyes for a beat. That ache, the one she'd been holding off for months, pressed hard behind her ribs. A knock at the front door made both of them jump. Clara moved fast. Peeking through the curtain, Cyrus marched. He stood calm, hat in hand, dust on his shoulders. Not smiling, not unfriendly, just unreadable. She opened the door halfway. Ma'am, he said, voice smooth as creek water. Name's March. I've been asked to have a quiet word with you. I'm listening. See townsfolk here? They got concerns. Not about you, exactly. More about the girl, where she belongs, what kind of message it sends, letting strangers walk off with children like they're picking apples. She's not a sack of flour, Clara said, keeping her voice even. No ma'am, she's a little girl. Which is why folks want her looked after proper. There's an orphanage east of Fort Mason. Good people, good system. She doesn't belong in a system. He took a step closer. You're not her kin. No judge would side with you. And if you leave with her in the night, it starts looking like something else. You don't want a federal charge. Or worse. Clara stood her ground. And if I say no, he smiled, just a sliver. Then I reckon something unfortunate might happen. The door closed before he could say more. She locked it, bolted it, and pulled Delilah to her chest. They wouldn't wait, not long. Men like March didn't believe in second warnings. By twilight, the boarding house windows were all shuttered. Ezra came by with a rifle wrapped in a cloth. Won't solve much, he said, but it'll slow him down. Clara didn't ask why he was helping. He just said, Joy would have done the same. Outside, the wind picked up. Boots scuffed on dirt. Someone lit a lantern and hung it near the saloon door. March's men still sat, quiet, still, waiting for the hour where rules got soft. Sheriff Malden paced near the jail, one hand on his holster. But even his presence couldn't stop what was brewing. Clara and Delilah sat in the dark kitchen. Candles out, windows shut. I'm scared, Delilah whispered. Clara touched her cheek gently. Me too. Are we going to die? No, Clara said firmly. Not tonight. And then the sound came. The low thump of boots. The crunch of gravel under weight. Multiple feet. A knock. Not polite. 3 raps. Then silence. She stood, heart in her throat. Clara Tate, March called from the other side of the door. Time to open up. Ezra, from the shadows near the back door, lifted the rifle slowly. Meldon's voice rang out behind them, sharp. That's enough. The sheriff strode forward, hand on his weapon. Ain't no law broken here tonight. March didn't turn around. Law don't mean much when the town says otherwise. I am the law, and I don't see a badge worth dying over. Malden drew. March smiled. That a challenge, Sheriff? The standoff stretched, thick and heavy. Inside. Clara stood between the door and the girl. The quiet before the storm. And all she could think of was how a child had called her mama before she even knew her name. The door shook once, just a test, not yet a force. March's voice came again, calm and cold. You got 1 minute, Clara. Step out with the girl. No one gets hurt. Clara didn't answer. She turned to Delilah, who sat crouched beneath the kitchen table, clutching her doll so tightly the fabric had begun to tear. Clara dropped to her knees beside her, pressing a hand to the girl's back. I'm here, she whispered. I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving you. Delilah's lips trembled. I thought you would. Clara closed her eyes. So did I. Ezra stepped into the kitchen with the rifle. They're not going away. I don't expect them to. You thinking of handing her over? Clara looked at Delilah. If I thought she'd be safe, maybe. But I've seen what they do with children who don't have voices. They go quiet. For good. Ezra's hand rested lightly on the doorframe. Then you stand tall. You make them see her. Not as trouble. As a child. Clara rose slowly and crossed the room. She opened the front door not wide, just enough to show her face. She stepped onto the porch alone, wind blowing the hem of her coat. The lanterns flickered along the saloon wall. March stood 10 paces away, his men behind him like hounds waiting for the leash to drop. Sheriff Malden stood further off, his hand on his weapon but his stance uncertain. The town was watching. Faces in windows, silhouettes behind curtains. Last chance, ma'am, March said. Clara didn't move. She's just a child. She's not your child. She called me Mama before I said a word. That means something. March stepped forward, slow, means she's confused. Lost children attach to anyone who's kind, but kindness doesn't mean you're fit. You've got no papers, no family, no standing. Clara's voice shook not with fear, but with fire. Then maybe it's time we ask what kind of standing you need to do what's right. March snorted. Lady, this town don't want you. You think you're going to change their minds with a speech? No, she said, lifting her chin. But maybe she can. And from behind the door, small feet stepped forward. Delilah. She walked past Clara. Barefoot on the porchwood, dress clinging to her knees in the night air. The doll was still in her arms. The men blinked. March's expression faltered just slightly. She stepped down the porch stairs and looked up at him. You gonna shoot me? She asked. March didn't answer. Delilah turned to the faces in the windows. You're all scared of her, but I've been alone. I've been cold. I've been hungry. She didn't ask what I was, she just fed me, sat with me. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the hush like a hymn. She didn't ask for me, I asked for her, and she stayed. Clara's eyes brimmed, but she didn't move. Neither did anyone else. Delilah turned to March again. You said this town don't want her. Maybe that's true, but I want her. And I think that matters more than what you want. Ezra stepped onto the porch beside Clara, hands empty now. His rifle rested behind the door. I've lived here longer than any man breathing, he called out. And I say, this girl belongs more than men who hide behind contracts and threats. Then Marine the widow who'd taken Clara lit a lamp in her upstairs window. Then another window. Then another. One by one, quiet souls made themselves visible. The town hadn't spoken, but now it started to glow. Sheriff Malden exhaled. Slowly. Well, seems the folks have made up their minds. March's lip curled, not with rage, but with the bitterness of a man who didn't expect resistance. He looked at Clara once, long and cold. This ain't the last place I've cleaned up, he said. And it won't be the first. You failed, Clara answered. He turned on his heel and walked back to his horse. His men hesitated but followed. The sound of hooves fading into the darkness was slow. Sourdough Clara stood frozen on the porch until Ezra touched her arm. It's over, he said. No, Clara whispered, looking down at Delilah. It's just begun. The girl wrapped her arms around Clara's waist, burying her face there. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Clara placed her hand over the small head and stood tall. Inside the boarding house, lamp flickered. Ezra walked back through the doorway without another word. Malden holstered his weapon and leaned back against the jailhouse wall. Watching the sky, later that night, as the town drifted back into uneasy sleep, Clara sat with Delilah curled beside her, both of them on the edge of the cot. The girl stirred once, eyes still closed. Did we win? No, Clara whispered. But we didn't lose. She looked out the window. Out there, more marchers would come. More people would judge. But something had shifted. The girl had spoken. The town had listened, and Clara, who had run from every connection, now found herself bound to one that asked nothing but gave everything. The dawn broke slow over Dry Willow, slipping across rooftops in long bands of orange and gold. The dust in the street caught the light like floating ash, and the town that had once watched from windows now stirred with tentative steps and half-open doors. The danger had passed, but not without leaving something behind, something invisible. Like a pressure that never quite lifted, Clara stood at the fence near Ezra's workshop, watching the sun rise with a chipped mug of coffee in her hands. She hadn't slept. Neither had Delilah, though the girl had finally dozed off, curled up with her doll beneath a quilt Maureen had left folded on the chair. Ezra stepped out with a plate of cornbread and handed it to Clara without a word. They stood like that a while, two souls who didn't owe each other anything but shared everything that mattered. "She's different now," he said finally. Clara looked at him. "Delilah," he clarified, "she carries herself different. Like she's not waiting to disappear." Clara nodded slowly. "She's not the only one." Ezra smiled faintly. "You staying?" The question had no weight to it. Just when. Clara sipped her coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I don't know how to stay, but I'm tired of leaving." Ezra chuckled softly. "Then maybe just don't." Later that day, Delilah followed Clara out to the pasture behind the old chapel, where Ezra had started carving a new bench. She carried a pail of water too big for her, wobbling as she went. "You don't have to help," Clara said. Delilah set the pail down with a grunt. "I want to." They sat under the cottonwood tree, where the bench would one day be, and watched the wind play in the long grass. A hawk circled overhead, and the world felt quiet in a new way, not the silence of absence, but the hush that follows a song you didn't know you needed. Delilah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn ribbon. "This was Mama's. I want you to have it." Clara froze. "Are you sure?" Delilah nodded. "She used to tie it in my braid. I think she'd want me to give it to someone who makes me feel safe." Clara took the ribbon slowly. It was frayed, sun-bleached in places, but still soft, still whole. "I'll keep it safe," she said, her voice caught in her throat. That afternoon, Meldon stopped by the porch with a ledger in his hand and a sheepish look on his face. "Town councils agreed to let you stay. On trial terms," he added quickly. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Trial terms? They're calling it temporary guardianship. But between you and me, no one's going to fight it now. Not after last night." Clara crossed her arms. "They didn't have much to say when the guns were near." "No," Meldon admitted. "But sometimes it takes fire to show folks what's worth saving." He glanced toward the house. Delilah was sitting in the window, braiding her doll's hair. "She's lucky," he said. Clara looked at him. "No, I'm the lucky one." That night, Ezra held a small gathering in the church. No sermon, no scripture. Just benches full of neighbors who weren't quite sure how to make peace with what they'd nearly lost. Clara and Delilah sat in the back, silent. No introductions, no explanations. But one by one, townsfolk glanced back, smiled, nodded, lifted a hand. It wasn't approval. It wasn't praise. It was welcome afterward. As they walked back through the dark street, Delilah looked up at Clara. "Are we gonna have a house?" Clara hesitated. "We've got a room, but a house." She thought about it. About building something permanent. About roots. "Someday," she said. "Can it have a porch?" "Yes, and goats." Clara laughed softly. "You want goats?" "Yeah, and a fence, so we don't lose em." Clara looked at her. So small and sure, her voice steady now. She hadn't stammered once in days. "We'll get goats," she said. Months passed. The room at Maureen's turned into a cottage on the edge of town. Ezra helped build it, plank by plank. Meldon brought by extra nails and awkward advice. Mrs. Haverley never said sorry, but she sent over a loaf of bread. Once a week, without fail. Delilah started school. She ran faster than the boys, memorized every story the teacher read, and wrote letters to Clara, even though they saw each other every evening. She signed every one the same way. Love, Delilah takes your daughter forever one day." Years later, a man rode through town asking for Clara. He wore a badge with the seal of a distant territory. Said he'd heard about a woman who'd stood down hired guns without firing a shot. Clara stepped out with a hand on the doorframe, and a girl, now nearly as tall as her, beside her. "You must be mistaken," Clara said. "We're just passing through." The man looked at them both. "No, ma'am," he said. "You stayed." And he tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode on. As dusk settled, Clara and Delilah sat on the porch. 2 mugs of tea steaming in their hands. The goats bleated in the distance. The fence held Dot, and for the first time in her life, Clara wasn't waiting for the road. She was home.